Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Uplands Neighborhood Association Post-Disaster Communications Radio Training Session. This will be the first of two training sessions. Let's first take a moment to consider what kinds of events might require us to rely on emergency radio communications. Well, extended blackouts, regional blackouts for one thing, an ice storm. We had a significant ice storm last winter, and I'm going to come back and talk about that in a moment. But there could be floods, of course, earthquakes. That would be the big one that we're all preparing for. At least that's what Prep LO is hoping that all neighbors will prepare their homes for, so that they can shelter in place following an earthquake for a couple weeks, ideally. Wildfire is now a real threat, unfortunately. Chemical spill, social unrests, including cyber attacks, which is one that I'm expecting at some point. It's just so that we might lose the electrical grid for any number of reasons. And then if there were a big disruption, we might have stranded drivers who are in Lake Oswego but don't live here and need shelter here. We might have family members separated across town. So now, as far as the ice storm last February, it was a wake-up call for city officials, in that they realized that they needed better backup communication. So there was very limited outbound communication from the city, from the EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center, which is at the new City Hall. But the power lines, many of them were down, many of the cell towers were down, and the backup batteries that some of those towers rely on eventually were depleted. So many people were without cell service or internet entirely. Thankfully, a lot of progress has been made since that time, and there's really great partnership now between the Lake Oswego Fire Department and the Lake Oswego Amateur Radio Emergency Service. And they've got new antennas and ham radio set up down at City Hall, and there's a new GMRS repeater on Cook's Butte, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Anyway, lots of great new developments. And then the reason you're here today and the focus of this presentation is the FRS radio program for the neighborhoods, and all of these things tie together. But the FRS radio program is the foundation. That's what the most neighbors are expected to use. So let's set some expectations here. In a major regional emergency, the fire department, police, and other first responders will likely be too overwhelmed to respond to individual requests. I mean, they might receive 1,000 requests in a couple hours. Obviously, they can't meet all such a demand. So the purpose of these FRS radios is for neighbor-to-neighbor communication and assistance after a disaster. And then, in coordination with the fire department, licensed radio operators can now communicate citywide using the city's new repeater. It's on Cook's Butte. Now, any one of you with a radio that has channel 17 on it, including the Motorola T600, you'll be able to listen to these net meetings on channel 17 that the GMRS and the ham operators and even the fire department are participating in. Everyone can listen to those, and they're encouraged to. Ham operators are also planned to be stationed at the LO EOC, and they will do what they can to pass along critical messages to emergency services, and they will also share any official outbound announcements on channel 17 on your walkie-talkie or on your radio. But regardless, neighbors are encouraged to plan to shelter in place at home, and don't expect to pick up your radio and call the fire department and have them come over. That's not what this is about. So when the cell phones and the internet are down after a disaster, what are the issues? Well, survivors can't phone for help. They can't reach service providers. And the coordination of the service providers themselves might even be hampered. And families and friends can't communicate to other families and friends that are in other states, for example. Hey, we're fine, don't worry about us. They can't send a text with a simple little message like that. And first responders might have difficulty coordinating their efforts. So The simplest means of communication are often the most reliable, and so you should use what you have available. So this means that even ham operators, they use the telephone, they use their cell phones, they text each other because, why? It's the simplest and it's the fast and most effective when it's working. So, if the telephone's working, use your cell phone, use your landline, use a satellite phone if you happen to have one. And maybe you still have internet access and you're able to take photos of some crisis nearby, and you could email them, for example. But now, what about when the internet and cell service are not working? You might want to even deliver handwritten messages, deliver them on foot. So just need to think through what the best available option is based on the circumstances. So the point of this presentation is about radio communication. There are many, many different types of radios available, from inexpensive to very expensive, very simple, bare bones, to overly sophisticated with lots of bells and whistles, low power to high power. The FRS radios are what we are offering and what the LO Fire Department is suggesting that neighbors get. FRS is family radio service. Anyone can use these. Doesn't require a license. The radios all share the same channels. So you might have different radios, but channel 2 is the same on each radio. You can communicate with each other. They're inexpensive, easy to get, usually fairly easy to operate, and they're perfect for like street to street, neighbor to neighbor communication. The disadvantages are they're only designed to work over short distances, maybe a quarter mile, depending on the topology of where you live. The audio quality is, scratchy and staticky, but they work. And because they're unregulated and they are a family radio service, you will often hear, in the middle of the day in particularly, you'll hear kids playing hide and go seek using these, or families are using it to keep track of their kids, or you'll hear whenever you see people on the street diverting traffic, you'll hear them saying, okay, let the next group of cars through. Okay, so there's all that sort of, we call that noise. There's a lot of that on these FRS radios. So all of these radios here are, for our purposes, essentially the same. They all have FRS capabilities. They're all, some of them have GMRS capabilities. That's a next level up that I'll talk about a little bit later. It's optional. But all of these radios, you can select a channel 4, and that is our new primary channel for the Uplands neighborhood. So if you, in the past, if you've received a radio from me, one of these, you probably got some instructions mentioning a different channel. But the new channel is channel 4, and then the backup channel is channel 11. And yes, hopefully that won't change. So the radio that the city, meaning the fire department and PREPA LO, are now standardizing on is the Motorola T600. And through a neighborhood grant, we can likely get more. And these are what are given automatically to all CERT team members. What's nice, or just a couple of the features of this radio, is that it takes AAA batteries. This is kind of a key feature because you could have a big box. You're encouraged to have many extra AA batteries that can fit in your radio, rather than. But the T600 also comes with a little battery pack. But you're encouraged to set these aside because, in general, if you can, you're encouraged to not use a rechargeable battery and just have a box of AA's. It's just, I guess, a little more reliable if there's a longer blackout. You can tell by the picture here they're very durable and waterproof, and they even have a big flashlight on the bottom here. And these cost it's $100 for 2 of those. So now this is the TID brand name FRS radio that we got through the city a couple years back. These are FRS radios, but these are bare bones. I mean, the main benefit of these is that they're dirt cheap, and we can hand them out to people. Obviously, but there are some downsides. One downside is that it has a rechargeable battery. So, you know, you need to make sure this stays charged, or you need to have a way of charging it when this battery runs out. If you don't have a backup battery or a way of recharging it, then you're done and no more radio until the power comes back on. So let's see here. So yeah, so these came from our 2019 city grant. Okay, so I did already talk a little bit about the batteries here. So in an emergency, you would obviously place a fully charged battery pack or AA batteries into the back of your radio. The key point is that the battery is already charged. Once the power's out, it's too late to charge anything. So you need to develop, you just need to regularly think about your radio, make sure that it's charged, and periodically test it. And I will share some details on an opportunity for weekly tests of these radios coming up. So sliding the battery pack into position, okay, I think I just demonstrated that adequately enough. And then when you're done using your radio, you should always take the batteries out. So if this were charged, I would set it separate and store it that way. Likewise, I would take my batteries out of here and set them aside so they don't drain, and they're more likely to be at full capacity when you need them. So there's so much I could talk about on each of these radios, but I'm just going to cover a couple basics here. So for the TID FRS radio, you turn the right-hand knob clockwise, and you'll hear power on, followed by the selected channel number. Power on 4. It said power on 4. So this one is ready to go. And on the T600, I will just, so there's a power button right here, which I can, well, I know you can't see it that well. But anyway, in any event, I've turned this one on. I've also selected channel 4 on this one, so this one is also ready to go, but it doesn't have any voice confirmation. So these are the controls on the T600. So just to turn it on, I pushed this power button, held it down for a moment, and then I used this the scroll button to go up to channel 4. And then on each of them, there's what you call a push to talk button, which is the button on the side. You hold that down to talk. And in a moment, I'll share some more guidelines on how best to do that and make sure that you get a clear message outward. A couple other features that the T600 has besides the flashlight is it also has weather alerts. So you could flip it over to the weather station. Let's see. Oh well. I need to select the right weather station, and I don't want to get distracted with that right now. But in any event, it does give you the it's NOAA. I can't remember what that stands for, but anyway, that's it's the regular weather service, and you can get that on these radios. There's more I could tell you, but let's move on about this specific radio. All the radios are different, so there's no point in my giving too much detail about any one radio. Okay, so regardless of the radio you have, you should consult the owner's manual so that you understand how to change the channel, how to set the volume, how to flip over to the weather station, and other basics like that. And so now before using your radio, you should listen to the channel. So, you know, listen to channel 4. If there's no one on there, think clearly about what you want to say before you get on. Think about what your message is. And if there are other people talking, you know, wait your turn. It's not like a telephone. It really is different than a phone. And you should hold your radio vertically with the antenna pointed upward, and hold the radio a few inches from your mouth, just like this. And in a moment, I'll demonstrate, and if you have a radio there that you want to try with, you're welcome to. So a radio is different from a telephone. Only one person at a time can talk, and anyone nearby on that channel can hear you. There's no expectation of privacy. And if you are helping out, say, a survivor, you should avoid, or in general, you should avoid transmitting personal information unless it's somehow necessary. You know, names, addresses, and phone numbers may be okay depending on the situation. But if someone were seriously injured or hurt, you would never want to use their name. I'm going to give you some examples of how, you know, the fire department would say something like, "We have a 50-year-old male on the street who's experiencing cardiac arrest." You know, you keep it vague, the extent of injuries, that is. Be brief. Only provide the pertinent details. You don't need to say things like please, thank you, and hi like you would on the phone. And your personal opinions, you know, are not part of what we're trying to share here. And CB slang is outdated. It's not used. It's not used on FRS, or it's not really used anywhere anymore, as far as I know. Things like, hey, you know, 10-4, good buddy, and what's your 20? Not using those kinds of language. You just use simple, plain language. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick little test, or a quick little demonstration, I should say, which is, so I'm going to use a different radio. I'm going to use a GMRS equipped radio. I can see that, I'm sorry, the focus doesn't quite work. Anyway, this radio is connected to an antenna on my roof, which gives me a little bit more power. And you need a license if you're going to use a GMRS radio. I'll explain a little more about that later. But I'm going to go to channel 4. Okay, so I turned on my radio. I'm gonna check the volume by holding down what's called the monitor button. Okay, that sounds like a good volume level. So I'm ready to talk now on channel 4. I'm listening, and the channel's not in use, obviously. I don't hear anyone. So what I'll do is I'm going to hold down the PTT button, and I'm going to hold it. You hold it down, and then you pause for just a moment, and then begin speaking. End with over, and then continue holding down just for a moment, and then release the button. Because if you start talking at the same moment that you push the button in, the beginning of what you say will get clipped off. Likewise, if you take your thumb off before you're done speaking, you could clip off the end of your message. And I'm going to wait for a response. I'll wait about 20 seconds, and if I don't hear anything else, I'm going to change my location. This is, I better turn off the other radio. Okay. This is Chris on Uplands Drive. I'm testing the Uplands Emergency Radio Network. Over. So, do you guys have radios by any chance? I'm just curious to know. If you don't have, okay, don't worry about it. So I would be surprised if I get a response, but I'll do the same thing again here. And okay, let's try that again. This is Chris on Uplands Drive, testing the Uplands Radio Network. Are there any other stations on Channel 4 that would like to join? Over. So, because this is a new program, there's not going to be anyone out there who's going to respond to this. But the more we share these plans and the more this program is promoted by the city, the more likely it is that I will, in fact, at some point get a response, and more people will in Uplands will know which radio station which channel rather, to go to in the case of some sort of regional emergency. Okay, so I didn't hear anyone. I'm not surprised. So if I knew if this were an emergency situation, I would assume that no one can hear me because of where I'm located and the power of my radio and the lack of a better antenna. So I would probably leave my house and go out on the deck. If that didn't work, I might walk up to the top of the hill, and then I'd definitely have a much better chance of communicating from there. So let's see. You should always repeat your transmitted messages to confirm that they're understood. Because the sound quality is not great on the radio, and so similar syllables can sound very similar and difficult to distinguish. Now, you don't have to use phonetic alphabet, but you will hear it a lot from experienced radio operators. So what I'm sure everyone has had experience where you're on the phone and you're trying to maybe spell a name and you'll say M is in Mary, T is in Tom, O is in Oliver. That will work fine. You're just basically picking a word that starts with that letter. That will work. But what ham operators and more experienced operators, they rely on what's called the NATO phonetic alphabet. So these are to avoid spelling mistakes and miscommunication, even across national borders, even. So, and you can see there's a specific pronunciation for these. So you pronounce, this is pronounced papa and Quebec, Romeo. So anyway, I'm not expecting anyone to memorize these, but you're definitely going to hear these and you'll understand what they mean. You'll hear these for sure on the GMRS repeater. So yeah, you're spelling out words. So for example, let's just say you had to communicate this strange code 762 has. I don't know, maybe it's a code or something. So rather than say rather than say 762 has or 762 has, you would say announce each digit individually. 762 dash Hotel Alpha Sierra. So here's another example. So let's just say you're on a radio, it's kind of scratchy, and someone's saying, go to Sunderleaf Plaza. I don't even know where Sunderleaf Plaza is. It's complicated spelling. So you would say, I'll spell the name of the location. The first word is spelled Sierra, Uniform, November, Delta, Echo, Lima, Echo, Alpha, Foxtrot. The second word in the location is Papa, Lima, Alpha, Zulu, Alpha. And you can get through a lot of radio noise when you communicate in that way. You'll also hear what are called pro words. These are commonly used, and you're welcome to adopt them. But again, you can just use plain English. Don't worry about it. But usually you say this is. You're announcing who's calling. So this is Chris on Uplands Drive. Over. And if I'm distracted, let's say I have to write something down, I would say stand by. Or if I hear someone say, "Hey, Chris, are you there?" I might say, "This is Chris. Go ahead." If I'm leaving, I'm putting the radio down, and after a conversation, I would say, "Chris, out," or clear. And then affirmative or negative, that's optional. But it's easier it's clearer than yes and no when there's noise. Tactical call signs are used throughout FEMA's incident command system. So all the Lake Oswego amateur emergency radio service operators have taken courses to learn about FEMA's incident command system. And what this is whenever there's a disaster or crisis of any kind, you might need the police department, you might need the fire department, you might need USGS, you might need the water department, you might need the FBI, you might need, who knows, right? Every situation is different. So how in the world do these groups come together and immediately put up a plan? Well, it's this whole thing called the incident command system. And so someone is going to be assigned the role of incident commander, might be a fireman, might be a policeman, might be a mayor, who knows? But that's the incident commander, and the incident commander and everyone else knows what the roles are that need to be filled. So someone who's a fireman is still a fireman, but they might also be the information officer for a big crisis, or maybe they'll be the public liaison who talks to the press, and they're playing that role in that incident. So in that kind of scenario, they use tactical call signs to identify the radio location, not the person. So I would never say this is Chris on Uplands in that kind of environment. It would be what I would probably say is, I would call myself maybe Uplands 1, or maybe Egan Way. And then that way other people could come and use the radio. I mean, if something went on for over many hours or days, you need someone else who could come in and basically take over the role, this tactical position, And it's not specific to the person, it's about the position and the radio. So you might be part of a team. There might be a radio operator or multiple even, and then a scribe, someone who can, let's just say neighbors are coming by with handwritten messages. Someone needs to triage all that, clarify what the messages are, figure out which messages are worthy of being shared or pushed up the chain. And maybe this group has a tactical call sign like Uplands Team 1. The fire department uses these sort of tactical call signs. This is how they operate. So the fire department has BC 213, which I think means Battalion Chief 213, and a certain fire truck is Engine 210. And there might be, I don't know how many firefighters are on a fire truck, but it doesn't matter which firefighters are on the truck, what their names are, etc. That's Engine 210. And I think you get the idea. There are some other neighborhoods that have gone a little bit further, or significantly further, I guess, than Uplands has so far, and they have established teams. They have, Bryant Team 1, Bryant Team 2, and then East Beluga Park, West Beluga Park. You get the idea. These are just examples, and we likely won't even, I just want you to be aware of these because you're going to hear these call signs. You're going to hear them on the radio, and that's what they're about. Okay. Keep your radio conversations short and focused on the critical details. Received messages should be written down whenever possible. It's just, how the game telephone operator, right? So if you're trying to pass spelling of a street name, even, three people, three operators, someone's going to introduce a misspelling. So write them down. I have some, I'll show a couple examples in a moment. And concise, well-structured messages can be passed regionally, even internationally. And I'll show you some examples of messages like that. What are the kinds of things you want to talk about? Well, matters of life and death or imminent damage to property, they always take priority. So things like there's a limb that fell on my car, I can't drive my car, that doesn't quite meet the level of urgency that we're talking about here. Even like a lost pet, unfortunately, the fire department is not going to consider lost pets after a serious disaster. So there's an element of triage that all the radio operators are going to be thinking through when they hear various messages coming in. If you have something that relates to life or death or imminent damage to property, you can interrupt any conversation and say, we need emergency response right now. Everyone will defer to anyone who says that. In the world of ham radio, they would the code is break, or break, I have emergency traffic. And then everyone will say, okay, please, whatever the call sign is, please come now with your emergency traffic. And that will always get priority. Everyone else should immediately stop talking and yield to the emergency traffic. So we need to size up the situation. I don't know, is it a fire? Is it an earthquake? It could be really anything. There are many things that could happen. But anyway, gather the facts. Officials are going to want to know, well, who was involved and how many people were involved, what happened, and where is this happening? What's the location? So you need to assess the situation, think about what you want to say, and then communicate. You wouldn't want to just say, anyway, when people are panicky in a crisis, they will likely forget a lot of these rules. But this is why we're talking about them now, so that we can realize in the moment, someone may come on and just say, help, I need help, there's a fire. And then you're like, well, we don't know where you are or exactly even what you're talking about, so we can't help you. And then also think about what's going to happen next. If you see a fire on an adjacent hillside, I don't know. Just think about what's likely to happen next. So you could say to I have an example. Let's move to. I'll share an example of a conversation in a minute. This is an example of what's called an emergency services request survey. So if we if there's a big regional event, messages have to be written down because there's going to be such a backlog of messages. But if they're written down in this form and handed off to a radio operator like myself or another ham radio operator, we can get these messages through eventually. And you know, they're written down. The information isn't going to be lost, and we can track when the message is sent and whether or not it was received. Thank you to Ken Hawkins of the LO Aries group for putting this form together. It's just an example. Yeah, so handwritten reports have the best chance of being received by city and county officials. So yeah, because I could have a piece of paper on my desk, and I mean, I might have many conceivably. Eventually, I can send them all. Handwritten reports could be passed along to ham operators like myself, and there are others around, and with the assistance of a scribe, as I mentioned earlier, and maybe a backup radio operator. If we had to really set up a radio operations station, we could do it, depending on how long the event goes on, how complex it is. I can, let me see, I want to mention this first. We have the ability to send emails to the Clackamas County EOC even during a blackout with no cell or internet service. So let me say that again. If there's no electricity and no internet, we can still send and receive emails. The technology is very complicated. It's not important, but anyway, there are all sorts of forms. There's a little example of a form here on the left, and then here's how it looks as an email. But we have FEMA forms that we can send out. So we can general medical forms, Oregon State forms, and many others. So anyway, it's a great advantage. Okay. So I gave a little example of this earlier, but let's, a quick little example how to get started. This is Chris on Egan Way at Uplands Drive. Listen for a response. If someone comes back loud and clear and says, "Hi, Chris, I hear you," well, then I would pass along my message. If I don't receive a response, wait about 20 seconds, repeat it again, as I demonstrated earlier. If you still don't hear a response, consider moving to higher ground, if you can do that safely. It might be best just to stay in your house. Let's see. So this is an example of, there are three things in this message. There's the person's name, their first name, there's the location where it's happening, and then there's the message, what happened. So this is Jim on Uplands Drive near Wembley Park. There's a power line across the road. We need someone from the city to come deal with it. It's sparking. And then Jim's next comment, thinking a few minutes into the future, might be, it's probably going to start a fire very soon. So okay, now that is a complete message that could be passed along very quickly to the fire department. I'm going to read through a couple examples of real radio transmissions. I think these are firemen, but I'm not sure. They're calling themselves the search team. This comes from the wildland fire from last year. This comes from Lake Oswego Fire Department, this example. So this is an example of what you might hear on a radio for radio operators who use radio every day and are very clear on all the protocols. So Lakewood Command, this is LW, Search Team 1, over. And then the response, this is Lakewood Command, go ahead. We've located a male victim approximately 50 years old in the street across from 75 6th Street, who is conscious, alert, but possibly has a broken leg. The victim has been relocated to the sidewalk. Victim will need further medical follow-up. We'll be continuing our area evaluations. Over. So this search team is looking for survivors after a fire. And then the acknowledgement comes. Lakewood Command received. Lakewood Command received. LW Search Team 1 has relocated an approximately 50-year-old conscious alert male from street to sidewalk, appears to have broken leg, needs medical follow-up, and LW Search Team 1 continuing evaluation. Out. Okay, and then this is a further clarification. LW Search Team 1, this is Lakewood Command, over. This is LW Search Team 1, go ahead. And then, did you say that mail was in front of 76 Fifth Street? Over? Negative. The mail was in front of 75 Sixth Street. That's 75 Sierra, India, X-ray, Tango, Hotel, Street. Over? Acknowledgement. LW Search Team 1, confirming 75 Sixth Street. Over. Affirmative. 75 Sixth Street. Clear. There's a lot of time spent on just making sure that all the details are captured. So let's talk about radio reception for a minute. Radios only work on line of sight. Means you can only talk by and large to where you can see. So, you know, a wide open field, that's ideal. If you're up on a mountain and you can see all around you, that's also ideal. Reception also happens to be better on clear days. It's not as good on rainy days. The lower you are in elevation and the more obstructions that surround your house, trees and buildings, which we have plenty of hills and trees around here, the shorter your signal will travel. Every house has a slightly different arrangement. On average, expect your radio to travel only about a quarter mile. And in a real emergency, you might need to walk to higher ground if you need to reach the other side of the neighborhood. Anyone who's serious about radio communications, after they've tested their radio to see who they can reach, they should consider installing an antenna. This is not for everybody, but I've obviously done this. And you could buy a more powerful GMS radio. It's an option for anyone who's interested. Here's the topology of the Uplands neighborhood. I live over here, and the new citywide GMRS repeater is across the lake over on Cook's Butte. So I don't have, it's slightly over, there's a hill here that separates me slightly from the repeater, but I can still get through because I have an antenna on my roof. The best position to get into the repeater from Uplands is here, I would say on the ridge here, Ridgecrest and Prestwick area. The topology drops down here into Springbrook Park, down to 350, and then all the way down to 280 feet down here, like near Doris and Rainbow. So the end result is, if I'm up here on a hill, my messages, they're not, they don't go down there basically, and without a slightly more powerful radio and a better antenna. So just a simple walkie-talkie like this will not go all the way across Uplands, but there are other solutions. This is an approximation of how far my radio reaches. So I know for sure that I can talk to anyone clearly in this green circle, and I can talk to most everyone in this wider red circle, but where the topology starts dropping off down here, there's kind of a dead zone for me. But this is only, this is my perspective. So, everyone has a slightly different arrangement. And so the point is, messages will need to be relayed. This is why the repeater is so important, because the repeater that's on Cook's Butte, everyone in Uplands can hear it, what's going on there on channel 17. You may not be able to reach that repeater to send in your message, but everyone can hear it. And I'm hoping to get a few other radio operators up in Uplands area. Scott Hicks, by the way, is on over here on Doris. He now has a GMRS radio and an antenna on his roof. And last night he and I connected, and so we can easily talk to each other using a GMRS radio, which requires a license. It's just some more technical hassles. But anyway, it does work. So the point is, while you might just have a radio that only reaches about a quarter mile, there are others of us who can reach further and will be more involved in passing messages along. The backup battery power is an essential part of this whole equation. When the AC power is unavailable, you need to have some charged battery, pack or AA batteries, preferably a box of them, that you can put in your radio. They should always be fully charged in advance. Keep the radio turned off. Assuming you don't have a way to charge your battery, you should keep it turned off except for when you're going to use it. Don't let it run down. And during the ice storm, for example, we set up the ham radio group met every 3 hours at 9 a.m., 12, 3, and 6, and they would have just a brief net meeting. Everyone would check in, and a few of those folks had no electricity, no internet at all, but they were able to join these radio meetings every few hours and pass information along. You might want to turn your cell phone on periodically just to send text messages and turn it off again. Again, assuming you're trying to conserve your battery power. Text messages can sometimes be sent even when cell phone networks are overloaded. Texts are more likely to get through than voice messages. You should probably avoid using the built-in flashlight on your radio. You should have a better flashlight that's dedicated. You don't want to burn up your radio battery using it as a flashlight unless you know you can recharge it and it's not an issue for you. You should consider purchasing some sort of a backup battery. So like for this radio, again, it doesn't take AA battery, so it means it has to be charged somehow. A little battery pack like this can be used to charge a laptop or a walkie-talkie, for example. And then they have much more sophisticated versions that are portable. There are many options for battery backup. We now these new weekly radio nets are brand new and sponsored by, well, let's start with the one on the bottom first. Okay, so what the city now has provided, working with the ham operators, is GMRS nets. You can all listen to these on channel 17 on Mondays at 7 p.m. You should confirm that you can hear it on some upcoming Monday evening at 7. You listen to the other GMRS operators, and this includes the LO Fire Department. And although only GMRS operators, licensed operators, can participate, you're all welcome to listen, assuming your radio has a channel 17. Sadly, these inexpensive radios do not even have a channel 17. So, and now this is, oh boy, let me go back. Sorry. This weekly FRS radio nets. This is my own idea. It starts 10 minutes before the GMRS nets at 7 p.m. So every Monday night between 6:50 and 7, I'm going to get on my radio and perform a brief test like I showed you earlier, and hopefully I'll hear some of you on there at some point. And again, this is going to take time to communicate out to people. So it's likely that you won't hear anyone at first. It's possible, let's say, but over time, more and more people should get involved. So let's see. These are just the instructions for the weekly net. This repeats things that I've already talked about before. It's just a way of thinking about your radio, like, oh yeah, I know it's charged, and oh, there's a meeting coming up on Monday at 6:50. Anyway, it just gets you thinking about your radio so it doesn't get thrown in a drawer where the batteries will run out. For those that are interested in a little more radio power and don't mind some technical hurdles, there's GMRS radio. So this is one step up from FRS. It's called General Mobile Radio Service. This is the equivalent of CB radio today. So this is what most people who go off road and they put radios in their cars, they get a GMRS license. It costs $35 through the FCC, and if you have a GMRS radio and the license, you can have twice as much power on channels 15 through 22. So the repeater that I just told you about is on channel 17. So the folks that you'll hear there have slightly more powerful radios, and also radios that can get into these repeaters, open them up so that everyone across the city can hear what you're saying. When this kind of a radio can go to the repeater, and they say opening the repeater. So there's a special tone, and it means whatever you say will get passed through, and then it closes up again. And if someone doesn't have the right tone to open up the repeater, they cannot get a message out that others will hear. But again, anyone can listen. So let's see. Depending on where you live, you might want to mount an antenna. This is what Scott and I have done. And these radios cost about $50 each, and they have longer. I suggest a longer whip antenna. This is the next step up from the antenna that comes with the radio, and I don't know where that is right now. But anyway, it's a much stubbier antenna that comes with the radio. And if this doesn't work, then you might need to put an antenna on your house. I'm happy to help anyone who has questions about that. It doesn't have to be expensive, but it is complicated. I can also program your radio so that it has not only the ability to get into that citywide repeater, but you can also monitor all the ham radio conversations that are happening. So you can listen in to the Lake Oswego Amateur Radio Emergency Service and their conversations with the EOC. But if you're not a ham operator, you can't talk, but you can listen. And I can set up the radio so that when you scan through, you will pick up those conversations when they're happening. And one thing I didn't mention earlier, and I think is worth mentioning, is that you want to know how to get your radio to scan. So again, the inexpensive radios, they don't have a scan feature, but all good radios do. So like for my GMRS radio, I set it to scan, and it constantly goes through all the channels. And so if a kid picks up a walkie-talkie and says, let's play hide and go seek, I will hear that, which is obviously not the point. But so but yeah, I will also hear the Clackamas County radio service that has their repeater on Mount Hood, so it's for the entire county. And so so if you're scanning, you can also hear that if your radio's been set up for it. I think yeah, okay. So I think that's just about the end of my presentation. Thank you to the LO Fire Department and Lake Oswego Amateur Radio Emergency Service for all of this information, and in particular David Smith, Deputy Fire Marshal. I've worked very closely with him on everything I've shared with you today. And that's it.